Welcome back to Second Story, the podcast where we dive into personal growth, life-changing moments, and the journey to building something meaningful. Today we're sitting down with award-winning filmmaker Joshua Caldwell. He's a director, a writer, and a producer who's carved his own path in Hollywood, going from micro-budget films such as Layover into more high-profile projects such as Mending the Line. We'll explore his approach to filmmaking, the lessons he's learned in the industry, and what it really takes to have a career as a filmmaker. Let's get into it. Welcome to Second Story, everybody. My name is Josh Cybulski. Joining me as always is Corey Leckie. Corey, I know you hate this question, but what's up?
Not too much, just recording a podcast, you know.
Are you? Is that what you're doing? Oh, cool. Good for you.
Yeah.
Well, I'm doing the same, so that's cool. Joining us today, we have filmmaker Joshua Caldwell. Josh's most recent film, Mending the Line, was #1 on Netflix in March of 2024. It starred Brian Cox and Patricia Heaton. He's also directed the films Infamous, Layover, as well as Be Somebody. Josh, welcome to Second Story.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. Really excited to talk to you today. I promised my wife off the top that we would not go too deep into all of the filmmaking stuff and get too much inside baseball. So I will do my best, Amanda, to not do that.
I said, what are her questions then?
Her questions. She wants more of your story and
Right.
all the personal development, personal growth, that kind of stuff. So we'll definitely get into that. Corey and I were actually talking before you joined us about how when we listen to you, we often feel two things. We feel really bad about ourselves because we go, "Oh, we should have did that." with a lot of the things you say about your career. And then the other side of it is we do feel very inspired by a lot of the things you say. So it's really diametrically opposed sort of opinions on a lot of what you say. But we're very excited to talk to you. So getting into things with you, first thing we always ask our guests when they come on the show is to share their second story. So for those who have never watched the show, we are Second Story. We talk to people who have gone through a major change in their life that sent them down a different path, be it personally or professionally. So Josh, the floor is yours. We'd love to have you share your story with us.
Cool. I've talked about this before, so it's not really, anything that I haven't been very public about. But the thing that I really go back to is sort of the year 2015. And, I had spent years trying to make my break in the film industry. And, I had won an MTV Movie Award right out of college. I spent years kind of working inside the industry. I was a development exec for Anthony Zeiker, who created CSI, for a couple of years, and then eventually, and sort of left that when I made Layover, which was my first feature film. I made it for $6,000, and kind of decided in sort of conjunction with making that I was going to pursue directing full time, and started doing like production, commercial production, things like that. And then Layover came out, and in late 2014 we released it, and a producer who I'd worked with at Zeiker's saw it and wanted to hire me to do this show that he was working on for Hulu. And I was like, wow, like this is, okay, it's not ABC, it's not whatever, but hey, it's a step up, right? This is like maybe going to be my big break. And the really cool thing about this show was it had distribution. It had, supposedly had like a marketing plan behind it, like brands on board to help push it, right? And the show was called South Beach, and it was this 6-episode sort of telenovela type of multiple storyline set in Miami, in the world of crime and music and like, that kind of stuff. And so I was like, this is going to be great, right? Like, I get to go to Miami. I get to go make the show there. I get to direct all 6 episodes. It's gonna be really cool. And so, it had by the standards of Layover, it had a massive budget. It was like 1.5 million or something like that for the 6 episodes. And each episode was like 20 minutes. But by the standard of anything else, it was no money, right? I mean, that's barely enough to get one episode usually of any major sort of network television, series. So But nonetheless, it was like, okay, let me do something with it. But I found myself in making it very constrained by the process because I ended up getting like 15 days to shoot it. It was like 150 pages of material. We did 10 pages in one day, which for people that may not know much about filmmaking, that's a lot to try and get done in a day. And it was like, but it was a really fun experience. And I went through, I lived in Miami for like 5 months. And put a lot into it because I really felt like, okay, this has a shot, right? And then it was supposed to come out kind of June of that year, and it basically got released to like crickets. Like the sort of Hulu at the time was pushing their own, um, really pushing their own like originals, which this was not that. Um, I don't even know what happened to the Verizon marketing thing that was supposed to be involved with it. Um, and it kind of came out and like literally, I don't think anybody watched it. Like not a single person wrote about it, which, you know, that's not to me the measure of whether stuff is catching on is whether you start to see people independently picking up the mantle of like, oh, let me talk about this. Now, in retrospect, I have come to believe that I didn't do a great job on it. I have my own issues with sort of the work I did as a director, and it's kind of a blessing in disguise that nobody ended up watching it. Um, because I think at the end of the day, through really nobody's fault but my own, it just didn't. It wasn't that good. And but what really was frustrating was doing this kind of came at some personal cost. My wife, we lived in LA and I just had our son, and he was like, I don't know, he was a year old maybe when I went to shoot this. No, yeah, like a year old. And I, she ended up going to New York to live with her parents to help out, and it was like, well, Miami's closer to New York than it is LA. And it was like 5 months apart, and that was really tough on us. And so I kind of sacrificed a good amount of stuff to make this thing. And it felt like it was just this black hole. It was like I put everything into it and like nothing came out of it. And, I thought maybe I would get an agent or maybe it would, get people to say, oh, let's call him to do this. And it was just really, really like, I don't want to say devastating. It was like sort of quietly devastating. Like this feeling of like, wow, like I put everything into this. And again, I could sort of see at the time that I'm like, okay, it's really not great, but it's better than a lot of other stuff that gets made and that gets attention. And, and it just, something should have come with it. I felt that I've said that phrase several times throughout my career, going as back to the movie award and even as recently with Mending the Line, which is like this feeling that in the typical Hollywood story, you make something and then people start calling you, right? And I've had that happen to a degree, but you think that more is going to happen. And that's kind of at the time I thought more was going to happen. And I was just going through a very, very rough time, sort of coming back from that process with nothing, with the feeling like I had nothing to show for it. And I was really struggling with feeling like my entire worth and value as a filmmaker was caught up in whether or not somebody even cared enough to watch the show, and I knew inherently there was something wrong with that, but that's what at the time you sort of think it's going to be like. Show comes on TV, show comes out in theaters, shows on whatever, Vimeo or these platforms, Hulu. You think like people are going to see it and they're going to watch it. And when you feel like, because it's all about how that creates momentum for you. At least that's what I believe, how one thing creates momentum into the next thing. And when you don't have anybody watching it, well, where's that momentum? Well, now you got to start over. And it was sort of through the fall of 2015 that I kind of really had a lot of struggle with finding the value and the worth of what I was doing versus sort of whether somebody saw it or what they thought about it. And I don't remember the thing, but I remember I was listening to a podcast and it was with Jason Segel on the Mark Maron podcast. And he was talking about how he was playing David Foster Wallace. So he was talking about this idea of how, if your goal is to be famous, you will never be famous enough. If your goal is to have money, you will never have enough money. If your goal, like whatever that looks like, and sort of finding a way to define success. And I don't know if it was directly through that, but it was sort of tangentially through that I ended up finding Ryan Holiday, because I think his book, The Obstacle is the Way, had just come out, and I read it, and I spend most of my life, I go off sort of common sense. Like, does this sort of have, to me, a certain level of common sense? And when I read The Obstacle Is a Way, it felt like that for me. Like, this just sort of made sense to me, um, in a way other stuff hadn't. And that sort of started this process of, I mean, everything from that I'm on 9 years later now, this journey of sort of not only sort of mindset and mental, but also physical, um, professional, personal, like kind of really, you talk about a second story. I do look at things as like a before and after in that year. And a lot of the things that I learned in the process of going through that, I've been able to apply to more recent things when they haven't gone my way. And yet I haven't felt the same kind of like despair and I don't want to say depression, because I know it's not a clinical thing for me, but these feelings that like of value and of worth that happen when things just don't go your way. And so, especially in Hollywood, so the notion of rejection, the notion of why you're doing this, the notion of how so much of because it's you don't make a movie just for yourself, you make something for other people to watch, and you want people to watch it. So that was kind of what ended up happening. Was I just went through this process of making this show that just was like a giant black hole, um and never, and I guess you could say a whole second story life came out of it. But at the time, you struggle to go through it, and it put me in a place where I was really looking for something different, in my career, in my my personal life, but just a much healthier and fulfilling life all around. And so that's kind of that's the moment of inflection that ended up occurring.
A lot I take away from that. Ryan Holiday's book was a big major turning point for me. Somebody gave it to me. A friend of mine gave it to me when I was in the hospital, and it certainly changed my life, changed a lot of things. It was kind of the genesis of this show as well. So it's interesting to hear that. Going back to kind of early in your career, you mentioned you won an MTV Movie Award in 2006. Did you have a moment when you won that where you felt like, oh, I'm going to make it, or like this is the launching pad?
That was the whole thing. The
Yeah.
whole premise of that was like, oh, where's the key? Like, where's the key to Hollywood? Because at the time you go, um, when you're in it, and this is true of life, but when you're in the middle of something, it feels like the biggest deal in the world. And so with that, yeah, like I thought, again, the phrase something should have come out of this. um, but what you realize, and especially a lot of the stuff with the stoicism and with Ryan's writing and all that stuff, is just how little is really within your control. And something like the movie award was like, basically this thing got announced in the trades. It was in Variety. They had like all the nominees. And of course, I know that the MTV Movie Awards are bullshit, right? I like get that. Like they're not like nobody's getting hired because they won Best Kiss at the MTV Movie Awards. So but at the same time, you're like, okay, I get that for them, but this is like a popularity contest with like a young group of filmmakers. Like it's all by popular vote. Um, and and so it happened, and then I'm at the award show. I go up and give a speech, like, and at the time the awards were shot and then edited later, which worked to my benefit, because even though my speech was somewhat edited, it made it into the show. Whereas for subsequent years, they never got to go. It was all live, and they got their segments got cut for the other filmmakers that did it. They only did it for like 3 years. But what really sucked was when they released the press release, when MTV put out the press release on the winners, they didn't add my category. So like
Really?
when we got the nominees in the trades, I got phone calls and emails from like managers and like agents and things like that of people interested. And I said, okay, it's just not a thing yet, but maybe when I win, if I win, um, it will turn into more. And so that's why, well, if they had put that in the press release, it might have been a whole different story. And so again, it felt like this thing happened. Nobody watches the MTV Movie Awards. Nobody's like really tuning in to care. Or if they are, it's not to see me, And so I had a lot of bitterness around that for a long time. Not a long time, for some time. And, you know, the lesson I learned from that was, okay, like, doesn't matter what you really do. Nobody in Hollywood is going to just help you. Like, it is all up to you to generate everything, which is, for me, has been basically the truth of everything I've ever done. Um, and so what I did was I put the MTV Movie Award away, and I swallowed my pride and my ego, and I got to work, and I was writing, and I took internships, and that ended up that's what ended up getting me into Zikers. And and so I just kind of put the sort of entitlement away that might have come from winning something like that, and kind of just said, well, all right, fine, if that's the way it's going to play, like, let's get to work. But I was still young and naive in the way that I never really settled into sort of the stuff that I settled into later.
Hey everybody, hope you're enjoying the episode. Corey and I have spent pretty close to 20 years trying to get films and television series made, basically any script that we've written. We've faced rejection after rejection, never found the money to make it happen. I wrote a book, trying to get support that way. It just never happened for us. Joshua Caldwell, on the other hand, he managed to make an award-winning film called Layover for just $6,000. It wasn't even in the language that he spoke. Now he's here to show you how he did it with his 6K filmmaker course. Josh breaks down his proven process for making cinematic films on a micro budget without sacrificing quality. From pre-production to post-production, he teaches you how to maximize your gear, tell powerful stories, and create films that look like they cost way more than they did. So if you're serious about making films on your terms, this course might be for you. Sign up at 6kfilmmaker.com using our promo code SecondStory25 and get 25% off. That's SecondStory25 and you'll get 25% off the $97 price tag. Go take Josh's course and start doing the thing that Corey and I set out to do 20 years ago. I'm going to ask this because Corey and I kind of went through this, but how much do you think like expectations sort of led to what happened to you in 2015? Like your own expectations of how your career trajectory would go? How do you think that played into 2015 and what happened to you?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a huge part of it. I mean, I think expectations are it's like the positive side of worry and anxiety. Right? Like, worry and anxiety leads you down to things are going to go wrong, and expectations are things are going to go right, but the fact is, like, it's hard, the future doesn't owe you anything, and it's really hard to predict what's going to work and what doesn't, especially in Hollywood, and so having, coming into something with expectations, which I think is a natural, it's a very hard thing to counteract, especially in Hollywood, because you put a movie out, you're surrounded by people that are building up your expectations. It's going to be in this many theaters and these people are going to see it, because the whole premise of releasing a movie or a book or anything you do is this is going to succeed. Like, nobody's really going into it saying, well, I don't know, let's not count our chickens before they hatch here, right? Like, we may only make $1. Nobody goes into it with that attitude, because it's not really helpful. So your expectations get built up, and it's natural to hold on to those, simply because it creates feelings of positivity until those expectations sort of smack into your face, smack into the face of reality, I guess. And sometimes it pays off. Sometimes your expectations are lower than what ultimately ends up happening. But I think, like, it's sort of a, it's a condition that's, that has you living in the future as opposed to the present.
I think Josh and I both had similar experience when we came out of film school. We were given these expectations that, I shouldn't say given, you don't get taught that things might not go your way.
Right.
I guess. So when we came out of film school, we both made films that we won popular votes and things like that too. And you get out there and you think, okay, who's ready to hire me? Right.
Right.
And it just doesn't happen that way.
Nobody.
Like, yeah,
No.
especially in,
Or
time.
it's get in line.
Yeah, it's get in line. Exactly. Or start at like the very, you're mopping the sets kind of thing.
Yeah.
And maybe that's not where you want to be. So, yeah, I think expectations played a lot in both mine and Josh's story. Unfortunately, we didn't read the Ryan Holiday book early enough or something, because it was kind of that smack in the face that stopped us at that point.
But that's the dream that film schools sell, which is which is one of my issues with film school. They're selling, and it's interesting because when I created the course, like I'm sure everybody that creates a course does, you get sort of, negative feedback on, oh, you're taking people's money. You're like, and I'm like, I'm asking for $97 for like I think it's a steal for the knowledge that I provide, like practical hands-on experience based on my own films. I'm not making this up. Like I can show you in the movie where I did this thing I'm telling you to do. And you're like, but you don't think that film school is not a ripoff when it's $200,000, that they're making you go into debt? I mean, I don't know what it is in Canada, but in America, you can easily spend $200,000 going to film school for a degree that is pretty much worthless.
Yeah.
And I actually, I mean, to me, at least with filmmaking, it's like, at least you're making something, but like the people that go and get a degree in screenwriting, it's just like, my God, like, please do not do that. Like, do not do that. Like, give me $100 and I will teach you screenwriting in a day.
Yeah.
Like, and that's my issue is I think that as a director and as a writer, and I didn't go to film school. I applied. I didn't get into the ones I wanted to go into. I went to New York City. I went to Fordham University. I lived on the Upper West Side. What I ended up gaining was experience. Very little you can gain as a college student, but some experience, right? But in film school, like the like specific technical things you need to know to write a screenplay or to direct a movie, I could teach it to you in a day. It's really not complicated, right? But what I can't teach you is the experience that you're going to have and go through that's going to lead you to coming up with a story that you want to tell, or a story that you share on set that's going to give an actor a key piece of insight into the character, right? If you don't know what love feels like, how do you direct an actor to love something? Yeah. So, to me, that's ultimately my problem with film school. I find that film school can be really beneficial, specifically if you're like a DP, cinematographer, or even maybe an editor. Editing, you can learn really fast too. But to me, it's more about the ability to be around people. When you have a lot of people going to film school to be a director, they're all wanting to make their own films, and they need people to shoot them and they need people to edit them. So if you're able to sort of get in on that, you can get a huge education off of somebody else's dime, shooting on film, shooting on digital, shooting with the latest cameras, and some of them are probably going to be complete shit, right? You're never going to but you might have a shot or two that looks really good that you want to share. Like, you can benefit so much more. And you benefit from, like, as a DP, from failing, right? You benefit from not exposing something properly, or this is probably more when you were on 35, but like, just being in a lab environment to really learn all the technical nuances of cinematography. That I can't teach you in a day. Editing, maybe I can teach it to you in a day, but I think with that's where that can benefit. So you're kind of taking advantage of all these dreamers who are going there and wanting to be directors and wanting to make movies, and they'll either get paid, either the school fund it, the budget, or these filmmakers will pay for it. And you have the option to sort of shoot all this stuff and shoot different genres and try different things and maybe meet a director who does go on. But I find, like, as a director, like, I think it's just a waste of money, personally.
Going back to just my own film school experience with Corey. So we met at film school. We actually met the first day we went to school. We actually talked about David Lynch with each other. That was sort of the thing we bonded over. Rest in peace, David Lynch. but yeah, we were both there for the same reason. We wanted to direct, and I was probably halfway through first year where I was like, I don't want to do all this technical stuff, because that's what it all was. It was all like Corey could attest to this. I didn't want to run camera
Right.
or like learn all the different lights and things like that. I just wanted to make stories, and I enjoyed the writing aspect of it and the storytelling, but I did not enjoy any of the technical stuff. And that obviously, once I went to go work in the film industry, the one and only day I ever worked in the film industry, I watched a pylon for a Jenny truck that was coming to set.
Right.
I just sat there watching a pylon for 16 hours, and I was like, yeah, I'm not down with this. But yeah, that kind of was my film school experience. And I do say this to Corey often, like, wouldn't it be cool to create a course where someone could learn everything they need to know about film, where they don't go to school for 2 to 4 years and they could actually just go out and use it? So that we haven't talked on air about your course, but do you want to go into your course a little bit and what it is?
Sure, I can, quick little aside here. So basically, like, I had been, you see a lot of courses out there and you see people putting them out and you're like, I don't know, these guys don't know what they're talking about. Like, the big thing to me is always like when you see a course creator, specifically a filmmaker, look them up on IMDb. Like, look at what they've actually done, because anybody can go create a course, right? And I was just like, these guys are not actual directors, and yet they're making a ton of money and they're getting all this course out there. And I'm like, I've got a lot of experience. And I was trying to think of, like, I didn't want to do like a general directing course. That seemed, that's kind of daunting to put together. But I, because I had made my first movie for $6,000, I had, and met a lot of success with it. I just had a sort of unique insight into the process of making a micro budget film. And so I came up with the idea of 6K Filmmaker, which was, in the end of the day, maybe not the greatest name because people think I'm talking about resolution.
Yeah.
So, but anyway, but the point is, $6,000 filmmaker, and created a course that's available now if you want to buy it, or anybody's interested. But basically what it does is it teaches you how to make a micro budget film, yet that is not what everybody does, which is 2 characters in one location. Right. That's the most, even on Reddit today, they're like, oh, I made a movie for $100,000. There's 2 kids and people in one location. I've never made that movie. Never made a movie with 2 people in one location. Like, Layover's not that. And that's because people don't understand how to just guerrilla it, basically. Like, how do you, because in film school, especially, you're taught, well, you need all these positions and all these crew and all this equipment and all this and all that. I made Layover with 4 people and a Canon 5D. And that was it. I mean, we had a H4n Zoom recorder and some labs, and that was it. And that movie, we are on airplanes, we are in airports, we're in hotels, we're on the backs of motorcycles, we're in clubs. Like, we were all over Los Angeles because we did the thing that people don't do. When people make their $100,000 2 people in one room thing, where's that money go? It's going to all the crew. It's going to the 18 crew members that are standing behind the camera that aren't in any way making your film feel big and bigger than the budget. They're just taking money. And this is nothing against crew. Like, I have no problem with crew. I love crew, but I don't think that's always the appropriate way to make a movie, especially if you have no money. Instead, be smart with how you're doing it. So, like, we inverted it. We had 4 crew members and we were all over Los Angeles, instead of having 18 crew members and we're in one location. And so, and then I took it to the next level when I did my 3rd movie, Negative, where we did have $100,000 and we wanted to make a spy thriller, and we didn't want to make a spy thriller with 2 people in one room. So what did we do? We did the same thing we did on Layover. We shot 80% of Negative with a crew of under 4 people and spent about 20% of the budget. And then we took the other 20% of the movie and we spent 80% on the budget on that section, the fight scenes, the gunfights, any of that stuff, and hired crew on for that very specific section, rather than, having a makeup artist for all 36 days, we had a makeup artist for 3 days. And so, but that way that allowed us to get Negative is a big, sort of, it's a spy thriller that takes place it's a journey from LA to Arizona. So it's a road trip movie, feels big. It's got fight scenes, got all this stuff, but we spent $100,000 on it. And so I just said, I think I've got some knowledge that's worth sharing for people that might be interested. If you are somebody that comes from a film background, you know how to make movies, but you're struggling to really get your first feature made. Well, this might be a way to do it because I did it and it led to everything else that I've ever done. That's the other thing, is I can point to it and say, I made this movie for $6,000 and it got me these 3 other movies, which then got me these other movies, which then launched my career. So you go to 6kfilmmaker.com and check it out. It's got like a landing page there with all the info on the course and what you learn in it. You learn stuff on how to do what I call sort of modular storytelling. So that's a process of writing a script. We'll break it down. We're writing a scene, right? Most people, they fill the screen with description. Oh, it's got to have this. It's got to have this. I'm going to set it here. And then they have to, in production, go find something that fits that exact description, right? Instead, you write the dialogue. You let the dialogue tell the story, and then you shoot it wherever you can find that makes sense and is inexpensive. You don't write in a Ferrari unless you know you can go get a Ferrari. I mean, this is all going back to like, Robert Rodriguez and his 10-minute film school. Like, write in what you have and what you have access to. And so, but by modular storytelling, you're always able to sort of be really flexible because whether it's in this high level location or in this free location, I'm telling the same story. I don't have to change the dialogue at all. Or if I do, it's one line, and an example of sort of non-modular storytelling is actually, this was a lesson I learned doing the show South Beach, the one that was my second story kickoff. We were doing this show about, basically about rich people in Miami. And the producer was coming to me one day and he's like, I don't understand. You made a movie for $6,000. Why is this so expensive? Why is it costing us so much to make this? And I said, because you've written into the DNA of your show, successful, rich people. You wrote in cops. You really can't do cops on the cheap. They have guns, they have badges, they have equipment, they have to have a headquarters, they have to have all this stuff that goes along with it that you can't really, you can't call within the text of the dialogue this guy, one of the most successful record producers in all of Miami, and give him a basement windowless corner office. You can't say, well, this is the hottest club in Miami right now. This is where everybody's going, and have 20 extras, standing around. That's what I'm talking about. When it's contextualized within the script and in the story and not easily removed, it prevents you from actually being very flexible. You have to showcase that kind of stuff, especially when you're dealing with success or whatever. Yeah, you can get cheap clothes that look nice, but really at the end of the day, you do have to have some level of a visual evidence of success in something like that, or the audience is going to turn off. And you see it. It's like when people shoot a bar scene, there's nobody in the bar, and you just hear that hollow echo of dialogue, and it just doesn't work. And instead, what happens is you've got just cheapness written across the screen. So that's an example of modular storytelling. Another example is live environment filmmaking, which I did in both those movies, and I've done on other projects where you're shooting your scenes or your shots, and you're doing it in environments where you have zero control, right? Maybe you have a permit, maybe you don't. I don't think you always need it, but maybe if you want to get it. But Sean Baker's Tangerine is a great example of that. Sean Baker shot Tangerine on the iPhone, all this stuff. He shot on this sort of block of Santa Monica Boulevard in LA. He had permits, but he had no control over the people walking through, over traffic, over any of that. And he still shot the movie. The result is you get a lot of stuff for free, but you get this great sort of unproduced feel to what it is you're shooting and you're producing. So in negative, I shot on train stations. I shot, I shot in this really cool, Asian market in downtown LA where we had no permission. We shot a chase scene through it. And so, by shooting in these environments and structuring your script in a way that allows for these to be in there, all of a sudden you feel like you've got this really big movie. Versus, wow, everything's indoors. Now, this is all just completely stolen from the French New Wave approach to filmmaking. If you go back and watch those movies, all their dialogue scenes and performance scenes are all inside. And then these sort of, I describe them as one way to think of it as you've got your performance scenes, and these are like lakes. These are like the big lakes where you spend time, you get performance, you shoot that out. But then connecting these lakes are these rivers, and the rivers are the live environment stuff. These moments of sort of a transitory travel, whatever it is, that takes you from one scene to the next, and yet is sort of outside. It's big, and it sort of gets you a lot of bang for your buck. So those are the kinds of things I teach in the course.
Yeah, I can recall from Infamous and Mending the Line, a lot of scenes where you shoot where they're very big scenes, particularly Mending the Line, like the Montana wilderness, big shots. You use a lot of the landscapes to kind of fill the screen. And that's something it's really smart if you have a low budget to sort of just, it's a natural thing that you have. It's just there. Why not use it to fill your screen? And it does look expensive when you see it on screen.
Right. Like, a wide shot and a close up cost the same amount of money.
Yeah.
And so when you do wide shots and, it's always funny with like negative, because people think when you shoot in the desert, it's expensive. And I don't know why. It's like the cheapest place to shoot.
Yeah. I mean, Breaking Bad, good example of that. Like at first they didn't have a ton of budget. They did it.
Yeah. So anyway, but that's kind of, I built out that course and it's doing well. We've got students that have now made their own micro budget features and have released them, on Amazon with distributors and things like that. So it's cool to see people starting to pick that up and actually, and put it to use. So it's a lot of fun. That might be piggyback. That might be a little too in the weeds now for your wife. So let's get back.
My wife's going to be pissed. Yeah. I do want to kind of, I wanted to get into that because I had a question I wanted to piggyback off of that with. So you mentioned earlier that like in Hollywood, you don't really have anyone that's going to kind of lead you or somebody that's going to kind of, pick you up or help you out. How important was it for you? Like, did you have a mentor going through at all?
It's not to say nobody's going to do anything for you. I just like, really, everything's really got to be driven by you, because even if you have a mentor, they're not going to hand you a script. They're not going to like put a movie together for you. I've shared a lot of really great lately, or rather kind of right around layover. And I ended up connecting with Mark Polish. I don't know if you know who Mark is. Mark and his brother Michael are the Polish brothers. They directed The Astronaut Farmer and Twin Falls, Idaho, I think, and just really cool guys. But they had made a movie kind of right when I made Layover, right before I made Layover, I think, and it was called For Lovers Only, which they went and made it for no money. They shot it on a 5D. They went to France with Stana Katic and shot this really great love story, but they shot it completely like I did Layover, just completely stole everything. And so I ended up connecting on it, and he is, he's definitely was a big indie Sundance director in the 90s with his brother. So he's become a little bit of a mentor to me, I would say. But it came late, right? It was not something that really was happening early on.
Not on the mentor side, but when you're working for Zyker, you had talked, I've heard on a previous interview, you talking about sort of the network that you were building there. And there was times where you were able to utilize people for cheap or nothing.
Yeah.
Kind of I'll scratch your back, you scratch mine. So can you talk a bit about network and how important that can be?
Yeah. I mean, I think that networking can be really beneficial, but it's only going to take you so far. At some point you got to do the work, and the benefit to me has been the relationships I built specifically with, collaborators, basically. I was able to meet some high level people when I was working for Zyker that would have been out of my reach just on my own, and sort of was able to sort of turn them into collaborators with me personally. Like my composer, Bill Brown, is a guy I've worked with on I'd say pretty much every feature except one. He's a guy I met when I was at Zyker's, and I was editing a project for Zyker and kind of took over the finishing of it and worked with Bill on the music. I met my sound guys doing stuff for Zyker. So I met a few people that have really, and other people I've stayed in touch with. I met my agent who was at CAA, who I'm not with them anymore, but like for a while, like he's somebody I had met when I was with Zyker. It can be definitely beneficial, but at some point it's also like, you gotta, I think people end up spending too much time networking thinking they're going to get a job out of it, but that's not really I don't think that's really how it works. I think it's really about you giving other people a job.
Do for them, and then hopefully it comes back
at
some point.
Yeah. And not ask too much of them.
Yeah, That's kind of the I mean, Alex Hormozy talks a lot about that in business, and quite a few of those like business gurus talk about, like, if you want to become wealthy, you've got to provide something to other people that's going to make them want to give you your money. I mean, kind of the same thing with like building a network. You got to be able to provide something of value to other people if you sort of want them in your circles, I suppose.
Well, yeah, and I think that's like when I get, criticism of the course, for example, like I hear from a lot of DPs and they're like, "Oh, so you're not paying your crew." And I'm just like, you're just completely missing the point. Like and I don't say to do this. What I don't think you can do is go on to Facebook or whatever people use as message boards these days and say, I'm looking for a DP. He's got to come with a full red package and it's going to be 4 weeks of work unpaid. Like, of course, that's what everybody thinks, because DPs especially have just been bombarded by these filmmakers that are like, their expectations are, oh, these guys should be lucky to work on this with me and get the film in their, on their reel. And so I'm going to take advantage of them. No, like, it's either you're doing it yourself or you've got to put in the work of building up a relationship with somebody who is a DP, and you got to earn the right to ask them. And you got to set it up so you're not asking them to spend 3 weeks unpaid. When we made Layover, none of our crew got paid because we were all friends just making this movie together. We paid our actors because we had to, because of SAG, but we didn't really have any money. But what I didn't do was say, okay, crew members, we're shooting for 2 weeks straight, and you can't take, I don't care if you have a job, like, you're going to have to figure something else, take it off, like, use your vacation time to work for me. No, you don't do that. So with Layover, because I still had a full-time job, I couldn't take that time off either. We shot on weekends. We would shoot Friday and Saturday night. And so at the end of the day, nobody had to quit work. And yeah, it's kind of a slog for like 6 weeks, as you kind of work your regular job and then go to shoot this thing on weekends. But we all felt very passionate about it. We were all in it together. There was no like, oh, this is my director's chair and I'm sitting back while you guys do all the work. It was a shared experience. And at the end of the day, but it didn't impact our lives in any way detrimentally, you know? And so like, even with like composers, like, you can't go to somebody and say, I need the music in a week, so you got to drop everything and I'm not paying you. Like, I'm upfront with people. I say, hey, I don't have the budget you normally get, but I don't have a timeline. I
Yeah.
don't need it tomorrow. So take your time and work on it as you go, right? I'm not in a rush. I try to build that in so that I'm not asking people to sacrifice other higher paying jobs or better work, to come work for me. If they decide to do that, that's their choice. But I don't ever ask that of them, because I think that's taking advantage of people in the way that these DPs who criticize the course and all this stuff like are thinking, but it's really not it's not a good way to operate. And I don't suggest it. I think you've got to find different ways to create your film family and come together on a project that's meaningful to everybody involved. And in that way, they'll give you the world,
Yeah.
But they've got to also be benefiting from it.
Yeah, it's definitely got to be value going both ways. And I think that applies to pretty much any healthy relationship, that everybody's kind of got to get something out of it. Yeah. Which, yeah, definitely gets lost in the weeds, particularly with professional relationships. If it's all one way, it's never going to be a good deal for the person who's not having it come their way.
Right.
I want to go back to 2015 a little bit. So obviously you had everything go on with South Beach and you came out of that. I'm curious, when you did come out of that, you got home, it was kind of this black hole for you. By the way, I do remember the show. I was a fan of Manny Montana back in the day when he was on Graceland.
You were joking for a second.
I'm not. I actually remember, because my wife likes Manny Montana as well.
Yeah.
And we liked Graceland. So we're like, oh, he's in a different show. Like, we had heard about it. We're like, when's this thing coming out? Kind of thing.
Yeah. You didn't miss anything. I mean, Manny's great. I love Manny. And it was a favor for him to come and do that show for me. But it was like, and that was, again, an actor I met through Zyker.
Is that right? Yeah.
It was a project that Zyker did, and I worked with him as a producer. But yeah, I don't know how much you missed.
Yeah. I'm curious, when you did get back, like, how did you keep your drive alive coming out of something like that, where expectations going into it were high, you come out of it, you're feeling at this low? Like, how did you keep going when things got so tough for you?
Well, I don't want to overplay my hand in terms of it being too difficult, because I ended up doing 2 movies that fall. So, it wasn't a long wasteland of not working. It was more a realization of the mental state that I had put myself into, and the desire to not be in that again. Right. And so I came out of that, and it was sort of quiet for a while, but also it hadn't really come out yet. I got back in maybe like early June, and I think it came out in July or late June. I don't remember. But I think by August, I had already had my next 2 projects starting to go. One of them was Be Somebody, and the other was Negative. Negative was largely okay. So then there's 2 aspects here, right? Or two trains that are 2 tracks, whatever you want to call it. One track is, okay, I want to make an adjustment in terms of how I approach these projects, because I had such a difficult time with the 15-day big crew. You got to shoot 10 pages in a day. You're not really there to get the best stuff, right? Like, I didn't like that. That was not fun. And I needed a refresher. I need something to take that off my palate, because it was not an enjoyable experience. But I also needed, another paying job, right? So, but then there was also the mental process. There was sort of the whole mental aspect of it. So those were the 2 competing sort of non-convergent tracks that didn't really end up sort of coming together until later. But one was me sort of seeking a different way to think about what I was doing and success or lack of it. And the other one was trying to take what I learned from doing South Beach, that I was like, I don't want to do this, and I want to do it a different way, sort of prove that I could do it a different way. So like, Be Somebody ended up being a job. Like, I was like, okay, they were interested in hiring me. I pitched on it. I got the job. I'm going to go make the movie, a little bit of money in my pocket, but that ended up being this thing where we shot for like 12 days. I mean, it was like a feature in 12. I was like, so frustrating. It's like,
More of the same kind of.
More of the same. And I think like you just that idea of being in what felt like a assembly line factory, like you're just trying to get through your day and get something on, doing 3 takes and you're done, was just not an enjoyable process. Because when I made Layover, we only shot Layover in 11 days, but we didn't do a lot of lighting. We did minimal lighting. And so we really just got up and started shooting. And I would spend like 8 hours shooting a scene, and then we'd be done. Like, we'd wrap, we wouldn't even go 12 hours, because we were shooting overnight. So it was like everybody was exhausted. And we get to 6 hours, 7 hours, and we were like, I think we're done. But I would shoot a lot. I would get a lot of takes. I could experiment. I could bounce around, because it was just me with this little camera. But the trick was I could get really great performances that way. We could do it over and over and over again till we felt like we had gotten enough to really put together a performance. And then I had an enormous amount of choices I could make in the edit room. But when you only get 3 takes and your actor's not really on, what do? You kind of have to live with it. And so that's where, Be Somebody became sort of a job. And at the end of the day, it ended up getting me an agent and signed to CAA. But at the same time, I really did it because I needed to get paid. I needed to keep it going. I had to get the train going. But Negative became the sort of passion thing where I was like, I feel like there's a different way to make movies, and I wanted to go back to the Layover space and try it again, but with more money. And I got Mar Vista to give me $100,000 to go make this movie and leave me alone. Because that was the thing. I wanted to be left alone. I didn't want to be told how to make it. I didn't want to be having to submit like budget line items. Give me $100,000 and I'll give you a movie, and to be like, they did it. Like they believed in me and they trusted the process, and they're like, it's so little, fine. But that was enough for me to go make that movie. And I shot Negative in 36 days. In fact, we started shooting Negative. We shot 20 minutes of the opening, sort of the first 20 minutes of the film. And then we went dark, and then I went and directed Be Somebody. So I was kind of doing these concurrently at the same time.
Oh, weird.
and then did Be Somebody, and then that was only 12, because I was like, this is only 12 days. Like, I don't really need to, it's going to be over so fast. And then the holidays hit, Christmas and New Year, and then coming into January, I started editing Be Somebody, and then while I was editing Be Somebody, we kept shooting negative. And we would shoot negative in kind of these pods. We would do like a week here and then go dark for a week or two, and then another week here, and kind of stack all these locations together in a way that allowed us to sort of just focus on that, because it was just me and a producer. We didn't have a whole team of people really helping us. So, and we had a lot of driving stuff to do. So we would go up and I call the actors, say, hey guys, do you want to go do some driving stuff today or tomorrow? And they were like, yeah, sure. So we'd go up, and we wouldn't be encumbered by, we got to get this stuff done because we got to get to this other thing and get to this other thing. We were able to really spread it out, which I think I have some issues with the film, which are, again, my fault. But I think from a technical standpoint, in terms of size and scope and what we were able to accomplish on the budget we had, it's a really fun, big movie. The whole premise of that was me going, okay, in the first Jason Bourne movie, when Jason Bourne kidnaps whatever her name is, I forget the character's, Marie or something like that, and they drive from, through Switzerland to France, they just like dissolve, right? And they're cut. And it's like, that takes 3 seconds. I'm like, okay, but that's like an 18-hour drive. So like, what happens on that 18-hour drive when you've got an assassin and the innocent bystander in a car together? What ends up happening? So that was the premise of Negative. And it was also based on an idea I had back in college. But I was like, let's explore that. So it's the moments in between the bigger story that we ended up sort of making out of that, which is, we kind of had to do because we were making it for very little money, but we didn't want to do something that was too limiting, where they're just in a motel room the whole time.
Yeah, it's hard to believe that movie costs $100,000.
Yeah,
looking at it, because it does look like a big movie when you watch it.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, and it has its own story limitations or whatever, but I think at the end of the day, we accomplished what we wanted to, which was also me being able to say, hey, I can do action on a budget, which is what made Infamous possible. So the thing is, I feel like at the end of the day, this was something I posted recently, but my sort of answer to the feelings of things not going my way, not working out, rejection, whatever, is really to take action. It's to try and, okay, well, what can I do to combat this? And the thing is to just do the work. It's to keep doing the work, and that's where the mental mindset stuff started to align with the rest of the stuff. But that was really the response to South Beach, which was me going, okay, the sort of professional response here is I'm going to keep making movies, right? Like, fine, nobody saw it. It's a black hole. Great. Didn't hurt me. It's not going to lead to anything, but that's fine. I can still create these opportunities myself, which is what I ended up doing. And I had a manager who was helping get me meetings and get me work. And obviously they would see the trailer to South Beach, whatever. So I did leverage it a little bit. But what I also had to do was sort of figure out what's my mindset approach to this, because I don't want to go through that again. I don't want to find myself in that same spot. And it's only going to continue because of this business, and because I'm always working on things. Things are not going to work out. Not every project's going to be a success. So I got to figure out how to deal with this, as well as just continuing to move forward with the professional stuff.
When you were doing Layover and Negative, you've talked before about how you embrace things like the grain in the footage, and you said just we'll use it to our advantage. I find sometimes perfectionism can stop you from going after things. Perfectionism can stop you from going after your dreams even. So I'm just curious, before that, would you say you were in that perfectionist zone and then you were able to get over that?
I don't know. I've never had the time for perfection or the budget,
Yeah.
I mean, and I don't know if you ever do on movies. Like maybe Nolan has the budget and schedule for perfection. I've never had it ever in my career. Um, I was thinking back to the fact that in 10 years of directing, I've spent maybe 130 days on set. I'm not making movies. I don't have the budgets to do 100-day shoots, where Martin Scorsese can shoot 5 shots a day. If that, he can do 5 takes a day and just get that exactly perfect. I'm more of a run and gun, capture it with some degree of aesthetic, and we'll figure it out later. But I've come to like that, um, I've come to sort of like that approach. So I think that but I think that a career in Hollywood, a career in filmmaking of any kind, eventually really just completely dissolves any thought of perfection, because there's just too much coming against you. There's too much that is impacting you, that is getting in the way of that. Maybe at the writing stage, but once you're making something, it's like, forget it. There's just too much stuff out of your control. So you have to embrace it. You have to embrace the accidents, I think, which is also what makes filmmaking as a collaborative effort fun, because you never know what an actor is going to give you. You never know what a location might turn into. I made a short film called Dig, which to this day, I think is one of my best pieces of work as a director. And this was like my coming out short, right? Like, I'd made shorts in college, but I'd shot them on DV at the time. Like, I had not really, and then I graduated and I didn't really do anything. I did music videos, stuff like that, but I didn't really have something that had legit actors or name actors, and was shot on high end cameras, and had a lot of money put into it. I always made very cheap shorts. So with Dig, I was like, I want to make something that has an investment. We ended up spending $40,000 on it. Probably another 20,000 in in-kind free donations, whether that was crew or work or sound mix or whatever. And I spent a lot of time preparing it for it. I found this lot out in the desert, because I was like, we're going to live here for days. I can't just go shoot it on a whim. Can't spend 3 days on a whim. Right. And a lot of these lots out in sort of Palmdale and sort of the northern desert of LA, people own them, their own plots of land. And so I ended up finding the owner, found this beautiful lot. It had this, it was cleared, which is so rare in that area. It's all sagebrush and whatever, but it was a completely cleared lot, kind of hidden from the main road, with this lone Joshua tree in it. And I was just like, oh my God, this is perfect for the story. And we get permission. I get trucks, I get trailers, I get the whole thing, right? We're shooting on 2 red cameras. I've got Mark Margolis from Breaking Bad in it. Aaron Himmelstein, who's been in Transformers, is in it. I'm ready to go. And we get there on day 1. And right where I had determined, right where I was going to stage the action, was a giant pile of trash, like home remodeling trash, not movable, a giant pile. And I was just like, we're fucked, and at the end of the day, my DP was like, well, actually, I don't even like that, because the sun's going to cross over if we do it that way. So let's stage it this way. We just won't see it. And we did, and we were fine. But if you're going into that and it destroys you, you're done. I had a really formative experience when I PA'd on a film in college, and it was a friend of mine who was at NYU said, hey, would you come help out on this film? Because I was just trying to get interesting experience. And I said, sure. And I get there, and it's in Connecticut, and they're shooting the Super 16 film. And I remember we get there and we get going, and I'm looking at the shot list, and there's a 2-day shoot, and there's 50 shots on this list, which is not out of the question. But we spent half the day getting 2 shots. And I was there, because the guy couldn't reorient himself based on what he was being given.
Typical
and it
school.
just was like a total break.
Yeah.
I heard the film ended up good, but I don't believe it. But anyway, I was like, wow, I never want to be in that position. So when I go into a movie, I've got my A plan, but I've got a B, C, D, and E plan too, in case A doesn't work out, or I have to pivot, or I have to change something here. And it saved me a lot, having that attitude and not going, oh, it's not working out the way I wanted. Instead going, this is what is being handed to me. How do I make it work for what I'm doing? And so, and so that's, again, mindset, things like that, trying to, rather than getting stuck in what you were planning, which, best laid plans anyway, there's an openness. Doesn't mean you can go in without any ideas, but if you're open to what is being given you, and you know the script and you know the project and you know it so well, now it's a sandbox as opposed to a sort of rail, sort of journey. It's like, well, we can play with this here because as long as this gets covered, we're fine. It doesn't have to be
Yeah.
exactly what I planned out 3 months ago before I ever saw the location.
Yeah. You're kind of the anti David Fincher. Fincher's like notorious for 22 takes and stuff like that.
Fincher's got the budget.
Yeah, he does.
Fincher's got the budget and the schedule to do that.
Kubrick, P.T. Anderson.
Trust me, I'd love to be in that position, but I'm not. So until you are, you're sacrificing something, and a lot of that is sacrificing the perfectionism.
Yeah. It's kind of funny that Fincher made a movie in one location and it took like 7 months to make it.
Oh,
Panic Room.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's
like, exactly. 2 people, 1 location.
Yeah. Yeah. Not much more than 2 people. Yeah. It's pretty funny. I used to think when we were in film school, I don't know if you remember talking about this, Corey, but one of our teachers used to talk about your film, like the quality of your film will come down to the compromises that you make. And I remember I believed that a lot when I would make films, because I remember like the better ones I made didn't require a ton of compromise, whereas the kind of the ones that weren't as good, they did. There were ones where I had to make a lot of compromise. And I sort of carried that attitude into my life. It's like, oh, things will go as well. If I have to make a lot of compromises on these things, they may not go so well. And as I got older, I kind of realized that's not really the right attitude. The right attitude to have is sort of respond to what you're given. And a lot of what you're talking about in your filmmaking is you're responding to what it is that you're given, especially when you're shooting that guerrilla style. Like, you don't really know what you're going to be given. So where do you think that mindset came from for you? Like, just responding to what life is throwing at you. Do you think that comes from holiday and stoicism, or does that come from something else?
That's something else. That's something since I was young, I think, like, especially as a young filmmaker, and sort of, just always being in a position where you have to make it work. You got to make it work. You don't really have, you don't have an option. You can't shut down. You can't just stop. And so I've just always been in a position where I've had, sort of big ideas or big desires as a filmmaker, or want to make, movies that have scale and whatever, and trying to figure out, well, how do I do that when I don't really have the money to pay for it? What does it mean? And then failing a lot and realizing, well, that didn't work, or, hey, this actually worked, but didn't for other reasons, and I think it's something that's been sort of, consistent in my career, in a way, sort of also finding projects that allow me to do that. I guess I'm not the guy, like, it would be a unique challenge to do something where I had complete and total control over every aspect of the film. Right. Like, even with like Mending the Line, it was like we were in a house, and Ike's house. We were shooting at Ike's house. And I remember we were scouting it, and the paint on the wall was awful. It was like it was like bright green and whatever. And my DP and production designer were like, we can paint the wall. And I was like, really? And they're like, yeah. And I'm like, oh, like, I don't think I've done that before. All right. And then what color should it be? And, and then we got, and I eventually was just like, look, whatever you guys think works best for camera. Like, I don't, I don't have, it's too much for me to think about, So I actually really like the constraint of it. I remember like Inarritu was once talking about how he doesn't like shooting on a soundstage because he likes the fact that he can't remove a wall to get the shot. It constrains him. And also you see the way he works in like natural light and all this kind of stuff. That stuff is very appealing to me because it creates a certain level of restraint in what is otherwise a completely unrestrained process. Like when your costume designer brings you like 10 shirts, you're like, I don't know, like, you pick, it's like,
Yeah.
I like what stuff gets, I like to a degree seeing what gets put in front of me and whether I can make that work. And then if it doesn't, let's find something else. But there's just something very appealing to me as a filmmaker. And I especially think too, because then it feels like I'm living and the film is living in a real world. as opposed to one of sort of just complete fabrication. Because I mean, people are good, but there's always something about the stuff on stage that just you can just tell it's a stage. Most people can't, but I can. And there's something
Yeah.
about the artifice of it that it doesn't excite me as much as a filmmaker. I could care less as a watcher. It doesn't really impact me. But as a filmmaker, I'm much more intrigued by, I think in a way, I'm intrigued by a stories set in real worlds, and how to sort of, again, take advantage of what's there as opposed to being um, impeded by it.
Yeah. I don't know why this bothers me, but the show It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, which is one of my favorite shows, when they switched from shooting in Philly to LA on sound stages, it was like jarring for me. I
Yeah.
don't know why, but it just lost a lot of like, I mean, it's a comedy show, but there was a lot of grit to it being in Philly that kind of got lost when they moved to the sound stage in LA. It's still a good show. It just doesn't have that same sort of magic that it did in Philadelphia. So I noticed that too as a watcher.
Yeah.
And it kind of bugs me a little bit.
There's something about the real world and real locations that are out of your control that is somewhat exciting to me,
Yeah.
you know? Because in a way it's like what is there's a term for it, but something about choice. That just having too much choice actually becomes a problem. Like even
Yeah.
for me, like from a work thing, I'm like, okay, like my wife's got a thing tonight. I have like, what do I want to do? And then I'm like, well, I could read, I could watch a movie, I could do this, I could do what movie? I have 5 movies I want to, you know what I mean? And then all of a sudden it's like an hour's past. You're like, well, it's too late. I got to go to bed.
Yeah. Netflix is bad for that.
Yeah.
There's
Yeah.
500 movies on Netflix I could watch. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, it's the impossibility of choice or something. So the less choices I have to make, the more I can focus on the more important stuff.
Yeah. That's true. You often talk about like having to take, or not having to take, but wanting to take action, create opportunities for yourself. I've seen you talk about this in a lot of different clips. How do you think that has helped your career? The fact that you are action oriented and you have created a lot of your own opportunities.
I mean, my manager would say it's probably my best asset, because I'm always coming to him with stuff. I'm always generating ideas or new things, and not all of them work out, and not all of them work out at the right time. But I think, like, the idea that you're going to make something and then you're going to sit around and you're going to wait until somebody comes to you means you're spending a lot of your time not making something. Now, even with me taking action, I'm spending a lot of time not making something, in terms of physically being on set, making a movie. Kind of where I ultimately got to, just going back, kind of tying it back into sort of that process of searching for that mindset, coming off of South Beach and all that stuff, which is really about finding enjoyment and finding purpose in the doing of things as opposed to the having done, you know? So to focus on the work, focus on doing the work, to enjoy the act of writing a script and the challenges that come from it, to enjoy the process of editing, to enjoy shooting, and trying to give very little attention to what then happens once you put it out there, you know, like just put it out there and let it go, right? And it's hard. I mean, even with Mending Line, it's like it comes out, you're reading reviews. Like I'm not yet in the place where like I'm sort of a high level director and I can be sort of immune to the reviews. I can ignore them because it doesn't matter because I have 15 projects lined up, I'm not there yet. Like to me, a lot of times the reviews and the success of a movie comes out is going to determine what happens next for you, and whether people are paying attention. But to me, it's always been about finding joy in doing the work itself, and that's why, like, even now, I realized for a while I was really pursuing specifically a feature film sort of path, right? And that was kind of everything I was doing. So I was developing feature films or writing a feature film or trying to get a feature film produced. And because a lot of the stuff at the end of the day is outside of my control as to whether it gets greenlit or whether it's getting made or whether an actor says yes, I was like, I'd like to still be doing something. So I've in the last year have turned more towards documentary and more towards these sort of smaller one-off projects that I can just go shoot, right? I could just make it happen. I can just say, I'm going to go shoot a documentary about this, and then I'm going to go do it, right? And put the skills that I have to use, but not in any way that is reliant on other people. That stuff can all keep happening. It can still keep going through its long process. But I don't really want to be just doing nothing while that happens. Like, it's not really in my nature. So, for me, it was the act of creating, whatever that looks like, and that to me is about taking action. So it's like, I find when things are slow, I'm like, all right, let me go read some scripts off the blacklist. Let me dive back into other ideas I had. Let me try and have conversation. Let me find a writer for this idea that I don't want to write, but might be a good idea for somebody. It's just always about, because really it's like, until you take that step, nothing's going to happen.
Yeah.
So, and it's always sometimes coming back to projects that have been dead and going, what about this? Can we revive this? So I just think, it just works better for me. It's just a much better use of my time. And it feels like then that I'm in control. Again, coming back to sort of Ryan's teaching of what is up to us, what is not up to us. Like, what are the things in your control and what are not in your control? Like, leaning into the things that are in my control and doing stuff with that, as opposed to the stuff outside of my control.
Yeah.
And just making stuff, I really set a goal for myself this year. I'm like, I just want to make stuff. Like, if I'm going to go, fine. Like, I've done bigger budgets, but if it means going and doing another $100,000 movie, fine. Like, let's do it. I've got ideas. Yeah. I just like I've come to like the act of making. And I've just sort of had to be less sort of focused on, well, then what happens when you're done making it? Which is hard, because the creative act is naturally dependent on somebody consuming that creative act, right? You guys make a podcast. I mean, it's fine if just your wife listens to it, but that's not really why you do it.
He knows our audience.
Yeah, I'm surprised you need two people to satisfy that audience member, by the way.
Yeah. Two people to satisfy his wife.
But it's like, you want people to listen. You've created something, and it's weird because, like, it's requiring another party to consume, even if it's just your wife or your mom or like whoever. But it created in a vacuum for nobody to really do, is sort of like, it's never really fulfilling its life, And so, you do want people, but I think that, like, how people then respond to it is really just not in your control. And you can't do anything about it. And you can't anchor your self-worth in something that is outside of your control, right? That was really the biggest lesson that I took from the experience on South Beach and sort of the aftermath of it, which was like, I have to, and this is what I said to myself, I have to be happy with the work that I did on it. And that was the thing about South Beach that was also hard, was not only did it get no traction and no response and not lead to anything, I was also unhappy with the work I did. Right. So I wasn't even satisfied in that way. And I just said, the first thing that has to happen is I have to be happy with the work that I do on something. And after that, it's up to the gods,
So your control then.
And so that's really something I've taken to heart. And that, in a way, in some ways, that can sort of be read as like, an egotistical type of approach, but it really comes from just trying to create the best work you can, and that's what's driven me when times get tough and I say, well, I need this, because at the end of the day, I am directing and I'm responsible for this budget and I'm responsible for telling this story. And, I'm not always going to acquiesce to the people around me. Sometimes it is about what I want, because I think what I want is going to be what's best for this project.
I have a question around the Hollywood. I got a feeling personally that Hollywood is dying. Mm-hmm. So in a traditional sense.
Yeah.
And I feel like you're an insider in there, but you're also an outlier in what you do. And I'm just curious your thoughts on that, because I'm seeing people like even Theo Von. Do you know Theo Von?
Yeah.
Him and David Spade, they're making a movie, and they were they had this script. And they're like, I don't know how, like, no one wants to make this comedy movie. And Kevin Smith goes on Theo Von's podcast and says to him, just, you've got money, you've got a built-in audience, make it yourself.
Yeah.
So I'm just curious what your thoughts are on kind of that changing environment. And if you see that happening, if you see more people just kind of doing their own thing, lower budget production companies.
The COVID and the strikes have not been good for Hollywood. But by the way, neither has the corporatization of entertainment, neither has the conglomerization of all these companies, and neither have streamers. Like, all this has been ultimately really bad for Hollywood. And it's caused it to sort of shrink, right? And they're always going to make movies. It's always going to be stuff coming out. They're always going to make TV shows, and you're going to get really brilliant TV shows that come out of it. But it is getting much harder for anybody that's not in this top tier to get anything made through any kind of traditional system. The lack of trust and the inability to take risks are just too strong for them to sort of, and it will come to a head. It's going to lead to a collapse of some kind. It may not be an economic collapse with Hollywood, but it's going to lead to some kind of collapse, which is, we're going to make one movie a year and that's it, or something like that. And the problem is that streamers aren't making up the difference the way that DVD did.
Yeah.
Right.
There was this really great analogy that Matt Damon gave when he was on the Hot Ones. I don't know if you've seen it.
Yeah, it's good.
Where he talks about doing the Beyond the Candelabra movie or the Liberace movie. And he was saying, well, okay, if you spend 25, a studio exec told him, if I spend 25 million on this movie in a budget, I got to spend, at least 25 million to market it. So that's 50 million right there. Now, and we split theatrical grosses with the chains 50-50. So now, to make my money back, this movie's got to make $100 million. And he's like, can a movie about Liberace make $100 million at the box office? The answer was no. Normally, you would turn to DVD for a movie like that, or they would know, okay, I can go make it and I'll lose money on the theatrical, but I will end up making it back on DVD. But that's not true anymore. DVD is done. And streamers, because of the nature of their, the way they have subscribers and subscriptions, it's not a 1-to-1, transaction. And so it's just like, if you're not the streamer itself and the streamer producing stuff on your own, meaning like Netflix is producing Netflix movies or Apple's producing Apple, it's very difficult to make that deal, because the other thing is like, and we ran into this with Mending the Line. Mending the Line, huge success on Netflix, right? It was #1 for a week. We were only available in the United States, but it reached the top 10 global list. So we got to be number 10, and we were competing with movies that were available all over the world. So we had that many streams in the United States, which is really cool. I made $0 from it. Well, I got some residuals, but because I'm in the DGA, but didn't really see any money from it. And Netflix got that for a steal. I can't talk about what it was, but they got a great deal on it, because now what's happening is the streamers realize, hey, we don't really have to go pay $20 million for this movie at a film festival at Sundance, because if we just wait, we can spend 50 grand to license it in 2 years. So why put out the money up front? So now that revenue stream that filmmakers were relying on through festivals and things like that to make a big sale, that's going away too. It's a very, very challenging environment for filmmakers of every kind to sort of wade through. And I think that, like, there's still money out there. There's still money that can be found. I can find money. One of the challenges we have now is getting actors. Right? Actors know that they're very valuable. And so they want money, their agents want money. And often that's not in line with what their return on investment is. If you even get a return on investment, You know,
Yeah.
Right.
like the whole like foreign sales model is like this giant house of cards. It's this like fantasy thing that like the way I describe it is like there's nothing else for anybody to believe in this regard. So we all just have to believe in it, knowing that it's not real, you know, like knowing that this is not going to get your money back, but there's really no other way to get your money back. So we have to kind of just believe in it, like, and, so what I think, what's going to happen, I don't know. I think there's going to be what I would think might happen is I find that look, everything's cyclical. So like we're kind of in that like late 50s stage of Hollywood. It's incredibly bloated. It's star driven. It's not making its money back. Everything costs like so much to just make a simple movie, and people aren't really showing up for it. Right. In the 50s, they weren't showing up because TV was starting to take over, but also the stories weren't that great. They were kind of like, oh, people will go to see anything. What came out of the 50s was the independent movement of the 1960s. And a lot of the great movies like Easy Rider and a lot of great filmmakers that came out of that, Scorsese, Spielberg, Lucas, all these guys, Coppola, right? I'm thinking that maybe we're in that kind of thing. And what I'm attempting to do is find a way to capture that wave as a young independent filmmaker that knows how to make things for no money. How do I take advantage of this? Right. Looking at like Ryan, I think Ryan Holiday references this in one of his books, but he talks about how like, like Rockefeller made his money in whatever you think of Rockefeller, but Rockefeller always made his money in the downtimes. He always looked to say, how can I take advantage of this to make money, right? Which is all right. You can argue it's pretty crass and like whatever, but at the same time, proves that it's possible, right? So I'm trying to say, well, we are heading into probably some downtimes and some rough waters in Hollywood. How can I take advantage of this? How can I have projects because people want, for lack of a better term, content, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whether it's short form content, there was a study that came out that recently said that if there was a kind of a streaming app that only showed independent movies, more people would go watch that than they would anything else, So I think people are starved for honest, authentic storytelling, right? And not the sort of corporatized, like, type of thing that's being churned out, where it's just like the same shit being churned out every time. It's just different. They want something that's unique. They want it to be different. And the way to succeed is to not spend $100 million on it. Like, I'm really curious to see how Paul Thomas Anderson's new movie does with DiCaprio, because that's $150 million budget. That's like, I think the biggest budget Paul's ever had is in the maybe 40 million, 50 million, like,
yeah, probably.
Like, like Eastwood's biggest movie was the $75 million Flags of Our Fathers. But the better movie was the $20 million Letters from Iwo Jima. Yeah. Right. So like, and he did better with that, like, than the bigger one. So, I think a return to smaller, because I think the bottom's going to drop out from actors. They're going to be, they're sort of, everybody's too bullish right now on actors. They're not really generating the returns that people need from them. So the bottom's going to drop out from that probably, but also I think there's going to be a turn towards unique, interesting, different voices, that are just telling unique stories. And then the key is to just not be making that stuff for a lot of money. Make it very inexpensively. I know everybody wants a budget. I certainly want a budget, but I think that's where, like, for me, I'm trying to think about, well, how can my experience in this very indie space, making things for no money, how can I keep doing that and get a budget or, a little bit of money to go do this and do that and have some distribution and maybe have some good actors in it that are willing to work with me because they've seen what I've done with Brian and Bella and like these other actors and West, like really good, Golden Globe winning actors. Like, that's what actors want. They want to be taken care of. They want to have like a director that they know is going to protect them and deliver a great performance. And so, they're willing to do stuff if you can get to them, right? If you can make friends with them and get them to be in your movie.
Yeah. I've really noticed the death of the like $15 to $25 million movie, which is, to be honest, like most of my favorite movies fall in that range, maybe 10 to 25 million. But a movie like maybe American History X or something like Drive, like
It's
Ryan
because,
Gosling's
yeah,
Drive.
because all the stuff gets so driven by stars,
Mm-hmm.
and the stars demand more. And you can't make, like, you can't do a foreign sales movie. Not say you can't. It's very difficult to do a foreign sales movie in the 10 to 20 range right now. And
Yeah.
streamers for a while were in the 20 to 40 range or whatever. They were doing movies like that. And then the studios were everything bigger. But now the streamers aren't doing that. They're all doing $100 million and $150 million, because it's just this like sort of cycle of success that ends up like going up and up and up and up and up. And then the directors realize, well, you could afford to do this, so I want to make this on this. And it's like, how bad do you want it? And well, we have this star, and they'll do it. But, The Rock's not going to do it for no money when they know Netflix has billions of dollars.
Yeah.
So I think it's a very, I don't know the answer. I've talked to some filmmakers about it, and it's very, everybody's in the same state. I think, to be honest, so as a director, I have all my own camera gear. I can go make a movie if I want. In fact, I'm planning to, right? I can go shoot a documentary. I can create my own. Okay, this is very like not artistic, but I can create my own asset that I can go make money off of. Right? Like, I don't have to wait for anybody to do it. I can put it up on a paywall on YouTube. I can do whatever, right? Like, I have the ability to create something that has some value to somebody and thus can sell it, right? I think it's actually way harder to be either a below the line crew member right now who is dependent on somebody hiring them, or to be a pure screenwriter. I don't know how anybody who sets out nowadays to be a screenwriter will ever get there anymore. I just think it's like, to me, you'll find people here or there, but the old 90s, early 2000s, I'm going to go to LA, I'm just going to be a screenwriter. I think that's gone. I don't think that's coming back.
That's kind of, that's kind of the world. Corey and I do talk a lot about this on the show, that the idea of like being a cog in the corporate machine to us seems like a lot harder of a grind than going out and creating something on your own, because at any point somebody could rip the rug out from under you in the corporate world and you've lost your job, versus like if you're on your own, it's completely up to you what happens, and the way things play out.
It comes back to the whole thing: control. What do you have control over? If I'm a screenwriter, I have control over creating the script, but the script is worthless unless somebody wants to make it.
Yeah.
Right? You can go write a book, and fine, no publisher wants to make it. I'll put it up on Amazon. And then all of a sudden you've got a series of books like Silo that were self-published. And now Amazon, Apple TV is making a huge series about it. Like, that's the power of control, right? Like, of having something. But to me, it's like you're an architect creating blueprints for buildings that are never going to get made. You're not putting those blueprints on the wall in a frame. You're not like selling blueprints to, it's not Sears Roebuck anymore where they're selling blueprints in the back of the catalog. Like, you can't make money off of that. Same with screenwriting. You are crafting a blueprint that is worthless unless it gets made into a film. And that's a lot to sort of, that's a big egg to put in that basket. Like, you're relying on quite a bit of things to go right for you to get even your foot in the door, so that you could go pitch to be part of 7 other writers writing a movie and AI,
Oh, yeah.
Now, I don't think AI is really the big scare that a lot of people do. That's maybe a whole other interview, but like, I think that like there's a lot that you as purely as, I just think like the idea of I'm just going to be a screenwriter. I just don't know how anybody does that right now. I wouldn't be able to tell you how to be successful doing that, unless it was you teamed up with a director who had the ability to go and get this stuff made.
Yeah.
Yep.
So I don't know. It's very, very challenging. But this all comes back to mindset, right? Because how are you getting through this? How are people surviving this, right? Like, how are people still creating careers and still creating art and still creating things, despite all this doom and gloom and everything going on in the world and the challenges of having a career in Hollywood. And there are a lot of people who are saying, I'm done. I'm out. I'm not doing this anymore. Like, I'm going to go find something else. Right. And so I think that that's a big part of it. And it does come down to, kind of, I think it really does sum it up is really just trying to lean into those things that you're in control of and what you're not in control of, and if you can do that and sort of ground yourself in it and have a few other things going on. So you're not just trying to make an independent movie, every year, for a real budget, which is very challenging. It puts you in a place of sort of feeling better about what it is you're doing, I think. And that's from personal experience, but also just, I think that most people feel better when they have some agency in their lives. And when you're simply depending on everybody else to give you money, to sign on to your project, to do what you need to help you get it made, you don't really have a lot of agency.
Well, Josh, I think we're going to have to call it, but last question for you. What do you think people that tune into this episode are going to take from it?
I don't know. Hopefully it's, a direct line to my course, and
we'll link your course
not
as
to
well.
pitch that. No, but I think that, like, to me, again, I mentioned in the course that a lot of people's favorite sort of category in the course is the mindset, right? Like, sort of my approach to mindset, my approach to handling rejection, my approach to handling the stuff that we've been talking about throughout, right? Like, and I think that that's what's missing for a lot of people. That's stuff that's not taught. You have to kind of find it for yourself. Maybe you stumbled on the obstacle is the way, maybe not. Maybe you found the Daily Stoic on Instagram, maybe not. But this is a industry, Hollywood is an industry that is fueled in a lot of ways by jealousy, right? And I can speak to this firsthand, which is that you're fueled by seeing, always fueled, you're impacted by seeing what other people are doing, right? And it makes you jealous because you're not doing it. Right. You're not getting your movie made. You're not getting your script made. But, like, one, everybody's on their own unique path. Two, what you see is not always the truth. It's not always what it may really be. And three, none of that should ever concern you, because if you're just focused on doing the work and you're focused on creating and you're focused on what you can control, ultimately you're going to be happier. You're going to be much happier in what it is you're doing. You're producing better things. You're going to be more curious about the world. You're going to be less anxious and less stressed. And at that end of the day, you might create a really great piece of art as a result, but you can't do that when you're bitter, when you're, stuck in jealousy, when you're stuck in having your self-worth be based on what other people are saying. That doesn't really lead to that good stuff, and I think this applies to more than just filmmaking. It applies to everywhere in life. And I think that at the end of the day, it comes down to just really focusing on doing the work and doing the things in your control.
Yeah, well said. A lesson Corey and I have had to learn. So love hearing that. We'll link to all your stuff for everybody. We'll link to your last film as well, Men in the Line. Josh, thanks so much for joining us today. We really appreciate you being on the show.
Yeah, man, it was a pleasure. Appreciate you having me.
Take care, everybody.
Flip the script, write your sequel, see you on the next one.